They very conscientiously sat in order, so in case you at any point forget who's who. But hi, my name's Mills. I'm the head of communications at Bitcoin Magazine and proud sister of Paul Miller, who spoke yesterday about technical Bitcoin 101. If you want to start, Zuby, we'll go down the line. Everyone, just quick intro.
How's it going, everyone? My name is Zuby. I'm an independent rapper, author, host of the Real Talk with Zuby podcast, public speaker and coach, originally from the UK, but grew up in the Middle East and Saudi Arabia, and family originally from Nigeria.
Yeah, I'm Mark Moss. I host a nationally syndicated radio show on Bitcoin called The Mark Moss Show. I have a YouTube channel and a podcast, so I do a lot of content, about 5 million views per month, talking about Bitcoin for the last 6-7 years, and that's it.
I'm Bitcoin Mechanic. I've been in the space forever, and my concern is not whether Bitcoin gets adopted or not, it's that people adopt it correctly, because tools aren't helpful unless you use them in the way they are intended to be used, and people can hurt themselves if they don't know what they're doing. I'll explain more about the technology we're building to facilitate that.
My name is Andy Schoonover. I'm CEO of Crowd Health, trying to give people freedom from health insurance, utilizing Bitcoin.
Thank you. We get to talk about, I mean, this is fun for me. I hope it's fun for everyone here. But we get to talk about freedom. And not only, we were talking briefly backstage, freedom is kind of a complicated concept because it's not necessarily an object. It is an active. It is freedom from, freedom to, freedom for, freedom with. I wonder, in what way would you say Bitcoin is freedom money? And what is your favorite kind of way to describe that to someone? I would say when people that don't understand Bitcoin and how it's an important tool, one of my go-to things will be saying, there are people that can't have a bank account or currently are unbanked, or there are ways in which this helps, Bitcoin can help them. But what is a way that you would describe to someone that maybe isn't already in the Bitcoin ecosystem?
Yeah, sure. Well, beyond the sort of basics of it being a decentralized digital currency that is deflationary, not run by any central bank, I'd actually follow on from the point that you just made. And oddly enough, it's sometimes easier to explain Bitcoin and its purpose to people in less developed economies. I think that in places like the UK, Europe, Canada, the USA, across the Western world, we all talk a lot, especially in the Bitcoin world, about how broken the fiat currency system is. We talk about inflation. More and more people right now are talking about inflation because they're feeling it. But it's so gradual that people still believe in the money system. If you're in a country like Turkey, certain countries in Africa, if you're in places where the inflation rate is 50%, 80%, 100%, thousands of percent, and you've just seen money get decimated, and you understand that in many of these nations, like, people don't really think in the West that in some countries you can't really save money. You can't save money because if you put away the equivalent of $1,000 and then the following year it's worth $10, there's absolutely no point saving, so you can't build any wealth. So in the previous panel, they talked about the volatility of Bitcoin. And to someone in a country like the USA, compared to the dollar year on year, or even on a short term, it can look like a very risky thing. But to someone whose currency is just dropping off a cliff and has been their entire life, something like Bitcoin is a much easier sell in many ways. And then you add on top what you mentioned, that a lot of people, everybody has a mobile phone. Even in developing countries, everyone's got mobile phones, but not quite a lot. Millions and millions of people do not have bank accounts. So I think that the more the technology can be simplified and people can just do easy transactions day to day, then that in itself is a massive form of freedom.
I like to think of freedom as F.A. Hayek put it in his last book called The Constitution of Liberty, and he compares the word liberty to freedom, but instead of needing to be compared to or from something, as freedom would be, liberty would be defined as freedom from coercion. And so coercion would be that regardless of which choice you're giving me, so we're given these choices by our government, so potentially get the jab or lose your job. We have a choice. We're free to choose. However, both of those choices lead me to their ends. And so liberty would be freedom of coercion, and basically that means that I have the ability to choose between choices that would lead to my own ends and not somebody else's. And so when it comes to Bitcoin and freedom, the way I think about it is that without the freedom to transact, there's no freedom at all. And so without the ability to store my private property and be able to use that private property, transact that private property, I have no freedom. So for example, the US Constitution, which is amazing. It's a pesky document some people don't like, but it's amazing and it guarantees us freedom, such as the freedom to assemble. However, if I don't have freedom to transact, if I can't put gas in my truck, how do I go to the assembly? If I can't get food when I go to the assembly, how do I go there? We're guaranteed freedom of speech. But again, if I don't have freedom to transact, how do I speech? I don't have a phone to get on the internet. I'm not able to print a flyer, build a website, et cetera. And so really, all the freedoms hinge off of or based are off of the freedom to transact. And that means freedom from censorship, the ability to transact. And so that's what Bitcoin does. It's censorship resistant technology. And I think it's the base that all freedoms could be built off of.
Yeah, I think you covered most of it. I think I would, to bring another angle into it, I don't think you can really discuss freedom without discussing responsibility. And the problem you encounter most of the time when introducing people to Bitcoin is you're having to tell them stuff that they don't really want to know how, they don't want to learn it. No one wants to know what a hash function is. No one wants to know what private public keys are, because they don't want to actually take responsibility for stuff. And you can't be a Bitcoiner, you can't enjoy the freedom that Bitcoin offers you, and this is true in all domains when discussing freedom, if you're not prepared to take responsibility for yourself. I love it. I call it the double-edged sword of freedom. You cannot be a Bitcoiner and use it and enjoy the benefits of it if you're not prepared to take responsibility for your own money, and it's an extreme responsibility. If you lose the password to the app that logs you into your bank on your phone, you just send an email or you press the button that says, I forgot my password, and that's it. Zero responsibility, zero freedom. Bitcoin is the opposite. If you lose your private keys, there is no one alive that can help you. It's gone forever. So you have complete responsibility for it. And when you introduce people, like, because we're telling them Bitcoin is great, you know, it's so wonderful, and I always start with this hard part. I'm like, are you ready for this? Are you actually going to meet this challenge head on? Because this is not like anything you've ever done before. Unless you have some background in cryptography or computer science, and to be honest, you need to know a little bit about economics and politics too. You're going to have to challenge all of this stuff you've been taught. You're going to have to learn a bunch of new stuff. There's maths involved. Like, are you really ready for it? Because I'm telling you, this thing is so good that it's actually going to be worth that. It's going to afford you so much freedom that you're going to want to go through that amount of effort. And that speaks to, that alone tells you how freeing and liberating it is. You've got people in their 80s and 90s learning how to do technical stuff that they've just avoided their whole life because they're like, I have to do this. I have to sit down and learn what this secret, what SHA-256 is. I have to learn what it means to generate a cryptographically secure 256-digit binary number that then gets processed into this, which then gets processed into a public key, which then gets processed into a Bitcoin address. And then when they send it there, there's a hierarchical deterministic process for how all of these addresses can be recreated from scratch. If I just have these 24 words or these 12 words, once you get it, you're like, but if I have these, that's it. I'm storing this in my head forever. I can keep this without anyone ever being able to confiscate it from me. I even wrote in the group chat earlier that Bitcoin is the only money you can take with you, because you can store it entirely in your head. You won't be able to spend it, but you can take it with you.
Yeah, I'll maybe throw in a third angle since these guys hit it so well. I think, where do we look for the ultimate source of freedom? And since we're here at Thank God for Bitcoin, I think that the only answer to that can be in the gospel. And so as you kind of look through the gospel and read what Jesus says, he talks about money more than anything. And the vine that sprouts up quickly, what is it choked out by? It's choked out by the deception of money. And few people kind of read that verse, in detail, saying is money is ultimately, or the love of money is ultimately the root of all evil. And that verse too is an interesting one too, because in the old translations, it actually says the root of all evil. in the new translations, it says the root of all kinds of evil, which from my perspective is, again, we're deceiving ourselves to think that's like, oh, we can say that, oh, no, not the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil, because that leaves out some things. No, it's the King James Version actually says it's the root of all evil. So all evil some way comes from money. And so I think that Bitcoin is a very key component of that, because what have we done? We have deceived ourselves with money, and Bitcoin gives us the freedom from that deception. I truly believe that, both in our personal lives and our personal spending, but maybe even more importantly, within kind of the government context, where our government has been deceived to think that we can print and print and print and print, with there being no ramifications of that in reality, and kind of bringing it back to a gospel kind of component of this. That printing is not hurting most of us in this room. It's hurting the people who can't come up with $500 in liquidity, which is 60% of our population. Those are the people that we are hurting, and we are told again in the gospel to care for those who are burdened. So I think it has a very tangible connection back to our kind of ultimate source of freedom in the gospel.
Following back kind of your freedom from coercion, right? Freedom to choose. It is a lot of the freedom that God gives us. And depending on predestination, free will, we're not going to talk about that on this panel. But there is a parallel in you get to choose how you spend your money, but if you don't get to choose, like you're saying with coercion, if you're only given two options that ultimately land where they want you to go, how do you see Bitcoin and, let's say, Christian responsibility or faith unto God? How do you see this as a way to honor God in exercising freedom or practicing responsibility?
That's a big one. I think kind of going back to what you said over there, I don't know if maybe you just kind of misspoke or that misheard it, but it's not it's not money that's the root of all evil, it's the love of money. And the reason why it's a key thing, and the reason why the Bible talks about money so much, is because it's so important to us, because our hearts are drawn to that because of greed and sinful nature. And so we're supposed to love other people and use money. Use money to love people. We're not supposed to use people and love money. That's the problem. And I think what Bitcoin does is it changes a lot of things, and one of those things it does is it changes our perspective. And so right now, because our money is losing value, we're constantly trying to make more of it, our quality of life is constantly degrading, and so it forces us to spend a lot of time thinking about it. For example, inflation. We hear about inflation all the time. Prices have gone up. So at 8% inflation, which we were last year, that increased the average American cost by $324 a month just to have the same quality of life. So if you make $30 an hour, that's 10 hours a month more you have to work just to have the same quality of life you had the month before. That's 10 hours that you could be spending with your family, with your wife, your relationship, working out, getting healthy, building a bit, whatever. And so because we're constantly chasing that, it forces us to, unfortunately, focus on money. That's where our heart is, where our focus is. That's what we're chasing, as opposed to the way potentially under a Bitcoin standard could be in a deflationary environment. Our quality of life is getting better while our workload is getting lower, and then we'd have the time to spend with our friends, our family, our loved one, et cetera. And so I think it can change a lot of those things. So I don't know, that's one way I'd see it change.
I want to draw a parallel. I'll try and be as quick as possible between the utility of a fair game. I think there's no chaos quite like the notion of playing a game with someone where the rules keep changing. And that's what is so annoying about the fiat system, and it's the nature of the slavery of it, because every time you try and say, okay, here's the rules, I'm going to move in that direction, then they go, well, that ain't where you thought it was, because it's over here now. So Bitcoin, the reason it's so liberating, and it's kind of paradoxical on first glance, but I would totally liken it to the objective morality that's embedded in the universe that is God-given, because that can look tyrannical on its face, but the reality is that is what liberates us to actually live. Because if God kept changing the rules all the time, That would be utter chaos. It would be impossible to live in a world like that. And instead, you just have it laid out to the point where you can say, I know what is godly and I know what is sinful. And you can live according to those rules and they will not change on you. And that's what's so liberating. You're given the choice. God is not a tyrant, no matter how people try to depict. But you're given the free will to abide by rules that are never going to change on you. So you can orient and structure your whole life to live in accordance with them or not. The choice is yours. That's freedom. But your freedom, the choices you're making are within a context that will not be changed on you, and you can't get rug pulled. And the parallel with Bitcoin is Bitcoin's rules are not going to change on you. It sucks to use anything else as money because the rules keep changing about what it is. You can't save in a currency where you don't know what the percentage of the total amount is that you have. If you have a Bitcoin, you have a 21 millionth of all the coins. But if you have $1, no one knows how many dollars there are because it's unknowable and they will keep changing it. So the idea that you could be a millionaire in the 80s and it would mean something, and to be a millionaire now means you just about own your house. That's it. Like you got like a little bit more stuff going on and you have a decent salary or something. That's a millionaire is now basically middle class, and that's the rules of the game have changed. The yardstick has changed. That is not freedom. That is a peculiar tool of slavery being used. It's money being used as a weapon against the majority of a population and them not really realizing it. And it's purely tyrannical, and I don't think you can have I think the nature of Bitcoin being so unchanging and allowing you to orient yourself against it and having a 10, 20-year, 30-year plan when it comes to saving in Bitcoin, all this low time preference that we constantly talk about is only possible if there's a game you all want to play and you all agree on the rules and those rules do not change. And that's the parallel with Christianity for me.
Yeah, I was going to say, just following on from both of your points, I think that something that Bitcoin fundamentally does is it helps to change people's time preference. So I think that just the way that our society is going, both in the West but also around the world, just in modern society, whether or not people realize it, I think from a very young age, so many people are programmed and brought up in a culture where there's just so much short-term thinking, either because your currency is being devalued so quickly that it makes no sense to even try to save, and it's just about spending, or we just live in this very consumerist fast food culture that sort of permeates everything. So many things are just treated, and we're encouraged to treat them on this very short-term way of thinking. So I think one great thing about Bitcoin, and even just holding it, is in order to reap the long-term benefits of it, you have to think long-term. You can't, I mean, yes, of course, there are traders who are trying to, make timings, but if you truly believe in Bitcoin and its purpose and what it's going to do, you have to be thinking very far down the line. I imagine everyone sitting here, so many people in this room are thinking in terms of decades and centuries, not just what's the price going to be in 2 months' time. That can be cool to know. It can be very addictive, but it's even addictive because we've been so programmed by the culture to just see those ups and downs. It's actually very interesting, even when people talk about Bitcoin being volatile, because it's like, well, again, on what time frame? Right, Bitcoin has been around now for 13, 14 years?
2009.
2009, okay, so 14 years. And if you look even in terms of dollar value, because that's what people know, if you're comparing what the price was in dollars 14 years ago versus where it is now, and you can just see that, I mean, it's a massive rise, and then you look at what's happened to the dollar, the euro, the pound, every other currency at the same time. You could say on a 5-year frame, on a 10-year frame, this is something that just goes up whilst everything else is going down. So I think it helps to just change the way people think, as well as what you were saying about the responsibility factor as well. And I think that longer term thinking and greater personal responsibility are two things that we massively need more of in our society at the moment.
Yeah, I wanted to add back onto kind of what he was saying here also about having this fixed set of rules. And I think, like, nobody's mad at whatever, LeBron James, because he's so rich and he's so good at basketball, and maybe we should break his leg and he should just play with everybody else, right? And that's because there's a fixed set of rules, right? And so people view that as fair, as opposed to the financial system. If you look at Jeff Bezos, oh, he's greedy, he must have gotten there by stealing from everybody, because the rules are not fair, and so you look at it that way. But I think the importance of rules is that we're supposed to have a law that's laid out. It's supposed to be easy to understand, and the purpose of that is that we can build our lives on that. So I might have a different game plan than LeBron. I'm not as tall as him. I have to be shorter, whatever it is. And so I can see those rules in front of me. I can plan my life on that, knowing they don't change, right? God doesn't change. He says he's the same today and tomorrow forever. And so we have that same rule. So there's a relationship there, right? The Bitcoin rules don't change. And so we can plan our life based off those rules. Hopefully that would create a financial system that doesn't change, but also, like I said, God's law doesn't change as well. And I think there's one other parallel, which you were kind of bringing back up, which is the issue with freedom, and we talked about this backstage before we started, and the problem with freedom is if everybody's freedom is that tyranny, well, it's not tyranny, but is it anarchy, and then does your freedom and then impose on my freedom, and how is that? And the problem I think that the secular world has is that they're trying to like legislate morality, and you can't really have freedom without responsibility, to your point with Bitcoin. And so we have to be responsible for ourselves, and that responsibility comes from morality or a set of laws that God gave us to live by. And so if we live by that set of rules, then we will have that freedom to live within that system. But if we want to have the freedom without the responsibility, without the rules, then we don't have freedom, and our freedoms are imposed on other people.
I hesitate to say this because I don't want to get into a big theological debate up here, but I will. I think that one of the things that I struggle with a little bit in this conversation is just this focus on rules, right? And it reminds me of kind of an Old Testament, New Testament type of scenario here, where Old Testament, we had a list of rules. I mean, there were thousands of them, and we couldn't follow them. And there was some pretty gory stuff that happened as a result of that. Yet Jesus comes and says, hey, it's actually not about the rules, right? It's about the end game, which is your heart is for me. And right. And so the Bitcoin rules kind of comparison there doesn't resonate fully with me. It more resonates as like, what is the end game, right? And the end game for Bitcoin is always going to be 21 million. That doesn't change, right? The end game with Jesus is always going to be, if your heart is, believes in him, the end game is going to be heaven. And so we're eliminating a lot of the rules along the way with the gospel. I mean, sure, there are some rules there, but it's basically Jesus, I think, there's some pastors in the audience that will tell me I'm wrong on this, but like Jesus came to say, hey, it's not about the rules, it's about me, right? And so that's the struggle that I have a little bit with the conversation around rules. The other one thing I might get myself in trouble in here too is I may not have said it for the love of money, but my viewpoint is that we all love money. All of us love money in some way, and then evil kind of permeates from that. And I think that one of the reasons I love Bitcoin is because it does put a governor on that. It does give us a framework from which we can work on that sinful piece of all of us, I think, that we do love money. And so how do we break from that sin? So that would be my argument, but
yeah, I've never been able to reconcile this, the truthful quote that says, the love of money is the root of all evil, and my love of Bitcoin. And I think I can reconcile it by, hopefully this is not too much of a cop-out, but given how bad and corrupting money has been until Bitcoin, I'm incredibly grateful for the fact that we have something Bitcoin isn't good, right? It's just a neutral tool, and it's so much better than everything else. You can't weaponize Bitcoin. You can't use a tool like inflation to disproportionately affect everyone that lives paycheck to paycheck while basically giving free money to anyone that has all their money in assets rather than cash, right? So I sure love that, and I can even further cop out by saying I love what Bitcoin offers us as a species. Not, I love having loads of it myself. I will admit to it. I will admit to being, like, when the price is going up, I'm enjoying it just like everyone else. But when the price is going down, I'm loving it too, because all the people, just like I said this at last year's conference, I was talking about the fact that when Christianity is mainstream, it's unbearable because no one at the church is there for any good reason. When Christianity is countercultural, like it is at the moment, every single person in this room means it, and they're sincere in their faith, and it's a breath of fresh air. So when the price is crashing and Bitcoin's having hard times, I'm like, great, all this crypto nonsense is getting washed out, it's going to disappear, we're just going to be left with the real Bitcoiners. And then, like, the nicest thing about it in reference to the last panel is just you're left with the best people being Bitcoiners. The people with all the Bitcoin are the people that just sat through it all and were like, no, this is better, I'm not compromising. And all the old, the Jamie Dimons and all these kinds of people, they're left broke. They're the elite now, I put in quote marks, and they're going to be left with nothing. It's going to be a beautiful flip of everything. It's going to be righteous. It's incredible.
I thought of maybe another parallel. I just thought of it as you were talking, so we'll have to kind of flesh this out so we can talk about it here. But to the point you're talking about, certainly this is, I kind of made the case with my kids, I think 2 weeks ago, and I said, we're not religious. Like, religion, I think of religious as religion. I have a set of rules I have to follow, like other religions, like Catholicism, and I have to do works. And the reason why I have to do works, and Muslims have to pray a certain time, whatever, I have to do these works in order to earn my way, and we were given a gift, right? And so it's grace. We can't earn it. So it's not, the Old Testament was still under the works-based system. Under the New Covenant, we have grace. However, there is still a set of rules that we're supposed to live by. Honor your father and mother, do not murder, love God, right? Love people. So there is still a set of rules that we abide by, but grace, so to your point. But I was just kind of thinking, in a parallel to Bitcoin, Bitcoin, unlike crypto, does a series of soft forks. So I don't know, I was just kind of thinking about this, and you can help me with this. But you have soft forks, right? And so, like, if I don't want to use Taproot, then I don't have to. I don't have to abide by that rule. I don't have to do that work. I can still use Bitcoin on my own node.
This is the language analogy for why, this is why no one explains Bitcoin, because they don't use the language analogy. You can add a word to the English language and it doesn't break anything. If only you or I know what that new word means, it's fine. This is what slang is. And if it develops enough, it becomes part of the lexicon for real. But what you can't do is you can't come along and say, this is a cloud, because there's a billion people, i.e. English node runners. You're running an English-speaking node in your head.
Seems like people are doing that all the time right now.
They're all going to say, that ain't a cloud. You just broke the rules of the English language. That's a table.
What if it identifies as a cloud?
Yeah. I love this, because identity politics and this attack on definitions shows you how hard it is to do this stuff. You have to use all the government, all the media, you have to try and force it down people's head, and because English is decentralized, you can turn around and say, that's not a woman, that's a man. Sorry, you can do it, because English is decentralized. That's why Bitcoin is decentralized, and that's why the rest of crypto isn't, because the rules are not enforced by a billion people or 100,000 nodes. It's a complicated system. If English was impossible to speak, and only 3 people could speak it, but it had lots of features that English didn't have, you could write the great works of Shakespeare with 3 letters. That's how advanced this language is, but only 3 guys can speak it, right? Then those 3 guys can change the rules of it. That's what crypto is. That's why crypto is not really decentralized. That's why Bitcoin is, because it's simple and dumb enough that you can run it on very primitive computers. And I'm going off on a tangent here, but
this has been, we've hit all, this is the spicy panel. This is we're going theological, we're going countercultural. I wonder if you were trying to describe, we've all just assumed this premise that Bitcoin is freedom money, but compared to other cryptocurrencies, you're touching on it briefly. If you were explaining why Bitcoin specifically is freedom money and not cryptocurrency in concept is freedom money, how would you do this to someone, and I'm really interested from a theological standpoint. Yes, we have grace now. We aren't in the old covenant based on Jesus, but what does that mean for us?
Wow, that's a big one. I had a thought just as you were speaking there, which is related to it. And this is that both the fiat currency system and all the other cryptocurrencies that exist out there I think they all, once again, encourage not just the short-term thinking, but with that, an immense sense of greed, right? I think one of the biggest problems we have with the money system, and I think this leads to a lot of crime, this leads to wars and so on, is the upstream corruption can cause downstream corruption. And it's so interesting, that quote in the Bible about the love of money being the root of all evil, because on the flip side, that's coming from mostly from the greed perspective. But the truth is that also when people are in desperate, impoverished situations, that can also lead to a lot of corrupt behavior. There's so much corruption and criminal activity that comes from a place of desperation, a place of want, a place of lack. And with that comes the greed. You can kind of get greed on both sides. You can have someone who's extremely wealthy who wants to hoard everything, and you get the greed on that end. And then you can have someone who's impoverished and they just want to steal and take from everyone else and make a quick buck. And I think that Bitcoin in particular is the best form of money that we have widely available, period, that changes the game there. Yes, a lot of people, I think, can get involved in Bitcoin initially just because, the number go up. But I think that the more convicted you get with it, the more time you spend really understanding what this thing is about, then I think actually it moves your perspective away from the short-term greed and away from the sort of rat race mentality of, okay, I need to keep chasing money. Because in this world, under the fiat system, we all have to chase money, right? You can't even just do your work, store it in the bank, and know that when you come back to the bank, you're going to be able to buy the same amount that you had previously worked for. So I think that these guys are all going to have their answers, but that's the thing that was on my head right there, is I think that I think Bitcoin is very anti-corruption, both on an individual level, but also at scale as well.
You're not saying corruption proof. You're still saying you can love and idolize anything, but that...
Of course, we're still human beings, and human beings are prone to sin. We are fallen. However, there are things that can encourage and discourage those types of behaviors. And I think Bitcoin is on the end in terms of money, of discouraging that sort of get rich quick mentality, let's take from others mentality, let's go start a war overseas and, make ourselves wealthy mentality.
This is kind of going back to Bitcoin Mechanic's point about rules and that it protects, that it almost makes it possible to not have to worship money because there is less need to put concern and interest and time and energy into maintaining and providing for your family or whatever.
Yeah, it gives you an honest measuring stick. Like it's like money becomes unpoliticized, it becomes neutral again, which means you don't love it any more than you love the kilogram or the degree Fahrenheit. It's just, the problem is we're measuring value and we're communicating worth to one another using money as a tool for doing it, and it's like you've got a ruler and it just keeps changing size on you. It's like, I can't use this as a measuring stick. I just have to, I know it keeps getting shorter and I keep having to, I want a football pitch is like, it's that many yards today and it's going to be another 10% more yards because the yard keeps getting smaller. It's just unworkable. So I do think I don't think it will be worship. I think we love it and we're passionate about it because we've had to explain to people so much about what sucked about money up until now. But I think our kids, and they're not going to know what they went through, right? What people suffered from the fiat system. They're just going to be, oh yeah, it's just money. Like, it's just money. Just works, right? You just have it, you spend it. I think it's going to be a neutral tool, which is what money always should have been.
It de-escalates, basically. So we've highlighted the decentralized aspect, and I would say both the stability and the decentralized are unique to Bitcoin compared to other cryptocurrency assets as not being freedom money. But I mean, we have 5 minutes left to kind of answer this, or at least attempt. Are there any high-level, easy talking points to equip?
Yeah, that's a real easy one to address. So again, it's the game of it. You can't save in money where the rules of the system can be changed on you. So in Bitcoin, there is no Vitalik Buterin who's going to come along and say, oh, there's now 22 million Bitcoin. And if Vitalik does that in Ethereum, that just will be it. That's the end of it. So every other crypto, because, again, the language with only 3 people speaking it, they can just come along and change the definition of words, and they're not going to get any pushback from it. So you have to be genuinely decentralized. And Bitcoin was not centralized at the beginning. It's become decentralized, and it gets more decentralized as time progresses. Everything else trends in the opposite direction because people don't understand this. They see Bitcoin, they see blockchain technology. They think, let's do Bitcoin, let's add a feature to it. Feature, 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 feature. All you're doing is making things more and more and more and more complicated. Suddenly, the language analogy again, your 3-year-old can't learn it because it's not simple enough. It's too complicated now, so there's no one speaking it, so the rules aren't enforced by billions of people. They're enforced by a small group, which means they can change on a whim, which means you're going to get rug pulled. That is the absolute theory of it, as simply as I can condense it down.
I don't know if you got to finish that question. Could we come up with a short talking point for what?
Short talking point, when someone, let's just imagine a scenario, you're at church, you're talking about Bitcoin, and you're trying to explain maybe how Bitcoin is a freedom tool, or why it's important, or why someone should look into it. Sure. And then it's like, well, I don't understand the difference. And I'm not saying explaining the differences between Bitcoin and crypto, but why crypto is not freedom money and why Bitcoin is specifically.
Yeah, the problem with trying to orange pill whoever it may be is that everybody's different. They're all in a different place. So as a salesperson, the goal would be to find the one person's need or problem, and then what is the one product or one benefit of my product that could solve that one problem or need that they have. And so everybody has all these different needs. But to that specific question, which is, well, why is Bitcoin a better freedom money than XYZ cryptocurrency? And I think that's basically what you hit on, which is Bitcoin is decentralized. There is no figurehead, and part of that decentralization is through this block size wars that we went through, but everybody can run their own node. And because I can run my own node, I can verify it. And because anybody with a 5-year-old laptop anywhere in the world could do that, it keeps it decentralized. In order to go with Cardano or Ethereum or whatever, I have to industrial grade server in a co-located facility, and so I can't do that, so they get centralized by Amazon, and we saw how well that worked out for Parler when Donald Trump tried to go over there. And so I think we would just explain that it's not as decentralized. It's a little bit of a technical explanation, and you can point to Ethereum, how they've changed the monetary supply, I think 3 times in the last couple of years. It's a little bit of a technical answer. It's not an easy one, but I think that's an easy way to do it.
Go ahead, Zuby.
Yeah, I was going to just say, I think the limited supply, 21 million, is also extraordinarily important. I think there are so many people out there who have heard of Bitcoin but do not know that its supply is capped.
Well, but this is the thing, right? Because Ethereum came along and said, Bitcoin is claiming to be sound money because they are limiting it to 21 million. So we're going to go even further, and we're going to call ourselves ultra sound money. And they came out with a bat logo, and we're going to actually decrease it over time. And we went, you're not looking under the surface of the decision you've just made. You've just demonstrated that you can change monetary policy. That doesn't make you sounder than us. It means you're just the Federal Reserve 2.0. The point is that the rules can be changed, and that the rules were good in the first place. You want to make sure the rules are good and that they cannot be changed. If they can be changed, it doesn't matter how good they are, because they might change in the future, and then you can't trust it.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting as well. I also think, look, fundamentally, and this flies in the face of everything that we are used to in whatever country we live in due to fiat currency. People are so inflation is so normalized that people expect that they do some work today, they save the energy of their labor in the form of money, and then 10 years down the line, that is worth significantly less than it was at the time. It should be, in any country that wants to call itself developed, it should be the other way around. At a minimum, it should buy you what it bought you before, but we've all just, by force and subconsciously just accepted that as the norm, but it should really be the opposite when you think about it, and that is what Bitcoin does.
Another thing I would say about the freedom money and why Bitcoin is that money has to have many attributes to be considered a good form of money. One of those, it needs to be saleable, it needs to be recognizable. People have to be willing to take it. And so if no one's willing to take that money, it doesn't do me any good. And we've seen now Bitcoin has global adoption. As a matter of fact, it's one of the top ranked currencies in the world. As a matter of fact, I posted a chart on Twitter earlier today from Bloomberg that shows that Bitcoin has sort of moved into this risk-off asset. And today, it is the 3rd ranked asset for this risk risk-off move ahead of every other currency out there, behind gold, being number 1, U.S. Treasuries being number 2, and Bitcoin being the 3rd. And so it's globally recognized. You can pretty much go anywhere in the world today and find someone to take Bitcoin from you. I could send it to somebody in Afghanistan. They could find a way to use Bitcoin in Afghanistan, and I don't think they could do that with any of the other 20,000 cryptocurrencies.
Very well put. And we are out of time. I feel like the question that I didn't ask, and maybe we can all talk about or think about later, is how is it not freedom money and the limitations that Bitcoin has? It's not perfect. There's nothing perfect on this earth, really. But as we move throughout, I thank you all so much for this conversation, sharing and sharing in the love of Bitcoin and freedom.
Thank you.